Hi, class. Welcome back. It is Tuesday. I'm getting everything posted up a little bit later, still before noon, but a little bit later than normal today. Had some stuff coming up this morning, but should still be able to get this all up to you before noon. So really up until this point, we've been kind of breaking down all these basics into different sections. And then doing these very technical projects like focus on value, focus on line, kind of bringing those things together a little bit, measurement proportion by looking at these techniques of how to measure, but also looking at our negative spaces and using those as a measuring tool as well. So now we're going to talk a little bit more and focus a bit more on the various types of mark making and how you can create visual interest and complexity in an image. If all you're doing for every one of your images is just smoothing everything out in your charcoal to this like perfectly smooth blend, everything's going to look really uniform, and you're missing out on opportunities to show a lot of that kind of textural surface and detail. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but generally speaking, you want, when someone is looking at your drawing, you want them to know what it would actually feel like to touch those objects just by looking at the drawing. So if it's a smooth and reflective glass ball, that should show in the drawing. If it's a brick that has rough texture on it, that should show as well. So sometimes that comes down to the way you do your mark making and your value. So there's a time and a place for smoothing out your value over a surface. There's another time and place for building it up. So in the exercises for today, you have probably watched already, there are a series of different videos I found online that are great, just demos. Usually I'll do similar demos in class that talk about drawing with your pen. So the purpose was focusing on drawing with the pen today, creating hatch marks. So you can build up value really easily with charcoal by just laying it down, smoothing it out. How do you create gradations of value with a pen and with ink that can't, comes out, it makes one kind of mark when it comes out. So in those videos, it shows you different ways to build up through different types of hatch marks to create value, to show texture. I love drawing with the pen. It takes a lot more patience. It's hard to fill in large areas with a tiny little pen. Like charcoal's fast. You just fill it in. It's quick. It's pretty easy in that sense. The pen takes a lot more patience and dedication to the drawing, but you're left with a much more complex and interesting surface and image. And I love that. I think it really shows this kind of richness. So for today's purposes, you're doing these exercises of just choosing an object and anything that you find interesting, and then drawing it with your pen. Hatching, as we saw in another video that I posted in the exercise outline, is not just for your pen. If you can do that, and you should be using those kind of mark makings with your pencil and with your charcoal as well, because like I said, if everything's just getting smoothed out with the charcoal, like say you're drawing a shiny glass ball, and that's perfectly smooth, and then you've got that brick or you've got a piece of wood, if you smooth out, you don't want that brick or wood to look as smooth as the ball. It's just not. So using those little marks to get in there and show some surface texture is super important. And the more variety of mark making you have in your drawing, the more complex and visually interesting that's going to be. So you can even use your erasers, like bring out little textures through subtractive mark making. Sometimes that's really important and a helpful way of doing that as well. So just a little recap of those videos. I'm going to do a slide lecture right now that some of the images we've seen before, some of them we haven't, but we're going to focus more on the types of mark making that's there, because we're going to, after that slide lecture, be briefly introducing our master study project, which will be due a week from Thursday. So Thursday, May 28th, it's all posted down below. And we'll talk more about what that looks like. But the basic gist of it is you're going to be choosing someone from this list, of artists that we're looking at in this upcoming slideshow, and you're going to be recreating one of their drawings. The purpose of recreating their drawing is not to copy them. It's not just about copying them. It's about really diving into that drawing and looking at how they compose the drawing. How do they structure it? How do they build it? What kind of marks do they use? And what you can learn from trying to replicate that. So there's some other options in there. Like I said, we'll go through it all, but this slide lecture is going to kind of be focused more on the types of mark making of each of the artists. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about what their work was about and some degree of historical context, but for the most part, we're going to be focused on that type of mark making. So I'm going to share this screen really quickly, and we'll get this slideshow all locked and loaded. Right. See if I can figure this out for you. Where is it? All right. I don't know why all that is there, but all right. So our first artist on the list is under Estes Alias. We saw these images before, but if you were to choose his work, these are actually engravings, but the process and the mark making is really similar to drawing. Part of this project is going to be choosing the appropriate material for the image that you've chosen. So being that these are printed with ink and the lines are really fine, if I were doing this project, I would choose my Micron pens, and then you'd get in here and you'd really focus on all these different lines and kind of hatch marks that happen throughout this kind of anatomy and musculature. Just another example of that. So in here, we saw this image of the operating theater, but once again, the whole purpose is not necessarily to just copy the image, but to really get in and focus on these lines and try to see how he uses cross contour to kind of show the different surfaces and volume, and where there's just a more of a bold contour line meeting up with this different kind of hatching to differentiate one object from another. So once again, really simple and graphic, but it still shows a lot of volume. Sometimes where you put the direction of your line is what's going to differentiate one object from another as well. We'll see some more examples of that throughout this slideshow. So once again, these are mostly images that we've seen. This is an artist named Albert Dürer. It's one of my favorites. And I think that what's interesting about these is they're prints as well. They're engravings, or they could be etchings. But he's got this kind of tone to the whole image. So like there's this medium value, kind of similar to how we were doing in some of our subtractive drawing, like lay out a number 4 value across the whole surface. And then after that, you've got some additive and subtractive work. So these highlights on the head are subtractive in that he's erased out that plate value, and then there's some additive work. So for this, I might, if I was to choose this, I might mix some mediums. Maybe I'd use charcoal first, and then I'd come in and I would do some kind of other mark making in there with additive work. You could even maybe use a charcoal pencil is what I would do. Trying to lay ink on top of charcoal is probably not going to work so well for you. But I think one of the things that's interesting and a good example in this drawing is just drawing hair. So drawing anything, like if you're drawing someone's hair, or you're drawing a tree and there's, how many leaves are on a tree? 1 million? I don't know, a lot of leaves. And how many hairs are on all of our head? A lot. So you can't go in and draw every single hair. It's just not possible. It looked like a little child's drawing with like little hairs poking up. But if you create value and then various types of mark making, you can give this illusion of hair. So he hasn't gone in down here and drawn every single hair, but some areas he has come in and shown some direction of line. And then in some areas there's like darker values and lighter values, but you're just kind of building up that surface. It's almost like a magic trick. Like we look at it and we see hair in the beard, but he doesn't have to draw every single hair. That's impossible. So similar to a Michelangelo drawing that we saw previously, that will be on the slideshow as well. It's this fabric going on here, but I just think that this is really interesting. And to me, it's a more visually interesting image when there's this kind of mix of the cross hatching and smoother values. From a distance, it still has this very realistic view to it and kind of look, but there's a little bit more hand in it, a little more texture and surface to it, which I really like. More Durer. So just like very detailed work. And if you were to duplicate this, once again, like really thinking about what kind of values move across the surface and where is their page showing through with no material, and where does it get really dark. You know, looking back on this Durer image and then thinking back to this Michelangelo image, like this is probably one that I would choose charcoal for. You might be able to use pencil for this guy, but charcoal is probably a better bet because you've got darker, like really close to black values in here. But different than the Durer, everything's pretty smooth. Like maybe if we had a higher res image or we could see this in person, we'd see more kind of mark making out there, but it's more of a smoothed out kind of version. Where in this Michelangelo, you know, he's focusing on the musculature and anatomy, but it's got more of that hatched look. So you could use a pencil, you could use charcoal, you could use a pen if you chose this image, but you wouldn't be smoothing everything out. You'd be focusing on this type of hatch mark making to duplicate it or replicate it. Similarly here. You know, I think it's really cool how in some areas of his drawings, they're a lot more detailed than others. So like you look in this zone here and like the armpit, ribs, and pec, there's a lot more detail. And then over here on this left bicep, there's just these lines, really simple lines, but it gives a sense of value across that surface. Those lines are just diagonal, all in one direction. And then as you come down the forearm, they start to morph into more of a cross contour. So in some places he's using mark making just to show value. In other places he's using it to show volume. And then in other places it's both. Saw this image. More studies from the Sistine Chapel. Leonardo da Vinci, we saw some of these images, just really quick sketches. But, you know, when you actually get in here and start looking at all the details, they're pretty complex and there's a lot of different mark making going on there. I think, you know, what's interesting here is we're looking at a lot of kind of horizontal lines going on throughout this, but it's still built up in a way, in this kind of textural way that we can kind of differentiate one object from another, still see what we're looking at. You know, this is an image I've seen a lot of students choose for this project, and I think it's a great one to choose because what's happening here when you look really closely is this image, outside of the major contour lines that are, you know, defining this image, all the value is built up through these diagonal lines you can see. Some of these lines even start in the background and they cross over the surface. So it's not like there's one diagonal line here and there's one here. It's like the same line. It's actually coming from the outside in, and then it's built up a little bit more in some areas. So they're all pretty much, this whole thing's composed of these diagonal lines minus the major contour areas that define, you know, the actual kind of contours of the skull. Another Leonardo da Vinci image we saw before. So this is an artist named Rembrandt who's really famous for his paintings. With any of these artists that are on this list, and we'll talk more about this when we look into, when we look into the project outline a little bit more, but a lot of these artists make paintings, or some of them also make sculptures and different kind of work in different mediums. But being that we're a drawing class, we're going to focus on drawing, and we're going to focus on a black and white image. So when you choose someone, you could choose one of these images, but you could also choose a different drawing that you can find. Like if you like Rembrandt, you can choose an image that's not in the slideshow, but you have to make sure it's a drawing. You're going to lose points if you try to redraw a painting or choose a color drawing. The point is trying to replicate it as much as you can. Talk more about that in a minute. But I think what's interesting at this, after looking and at the other examples of hatching, you know, this is a cross hatching example, but it's a lot less mechanical. It's not everything is super sharp and clean. It's like looser and messier. There's this kind of gestural, intuitive, loose quality to it. Everything's kind of scribbly. He probably did this really quickly, but you know, if you see his paintings, they're like these photorealistic, really moody, kind of dark, beautiful portrait paintings. I think this is self-portrait actually, but you know, even here, you know, maybe there's like 100 little hairs, but he's not trying to draw every hair. He's just showing us an overall sense of the movement and the texture of it. So for some people, you're going to want to, like, you'll really enjoy the stippling and the fine dot and building up these complex drawings through these really fine dots. That's really time consuming, but you know, this is a little bit less patient of a drawing. It's loose, it's messy. So you don't have to be crazy about your detail with it and the time you spend. More Rembrandt. I really like this sketch of Rembrandt's because it's simple, but it shows so much information still. Like the mark making is deliberate, and even though it's loose, we still know that we're basically looking at a barn, old farm road, and some trees, some fences around there. So, you know, really simple, but shows a lot. And this is a really big close-up, Major zoomed in close-up of one of his drawings, and you can see up close they're pretty messy. And then you zoom out a little bit, you've got something a lot more recognizable, pushing even towards kind of photorealism. This is an artist named Giovanni Perrine, Italian. It was kind of before the big romantic landscape painting movement came through, and he was doing these romantic, I don't mean like, you know, going on a date type of romance. It's a word to use this sense of like showing the landscape in this epic, more beautiful, it's almost like nostalgia can be romantic, and like you look back on something and all you see is the good, or you like make it more fantastical and more amazing. You talk about fishing, and every time you catch you talk about this fish, it was bigger and bigger. And that's like romanticizing the story, right? Well, these are these landscapes that are romanticized in that they're otherworldly. They look fantastical. They don't even look like they could be real. But it's hard to tell from this image, but you know, he does this kind of hatch marking that's just unbelievable. Like people don't draw like this anymore. They're not required to. It seemed like after we got cameras and we could just, you know, take pictures of things, we stopped drawing like this because we didn't need to as much. But when you can see these up close, the whole sky is composed of horizontal lines. They're all level horizontal going right across. But in some places there's more of them. In some places they're thicker. In some places there's none of them at all. And then you have this insanely detailed kind of cloudy sky. It's not a very high-res image, but you know, you've got these just so much detail and layers. Image that almost looks like a photograph of the Colosseum in Rome. I think I've seen this a print of this before, and it's like 18 by 24 inches, so it's not that big. But when you get up close, it's just so many fine line, tiny little marks and details. So with that being said, you know, if you were to choose this image, you wouldn't have to necessarily draw the whole thing, because he probably worked on this for hundreds, if not thousands of hours. So, you know, maybe you choose to draw a section of it, like you take the top right quarter of it and you just focus on that. You know, some of this is going to be about not biting off more than you can chew. So you choose a section of a drawing if you don't feel like you could finish the whole thing in a week and a half. I just love this one because it's, you know, way more romanticized, really kind of fantastical. We've got this street, there's figures, and then there's just these, it's just a cacophony of different objects and statues and trees and architecture and plants and everything. It's so over the top, but when you can look at it and really see everything still. So there's this level of detail you can get with using your pen or a really sharp pencil through this kind of hatch mark making that it's just hard to accomplish otherwise. So once again, this is a really close-up of a larger drawing. When you get up close, it looks a lot messier, right? Like that lantern doesn't look like a photo, but then when you skip back and you zoom out, you get this larger sense of it kind of becoming more detailed, coming to life. It's just like if you took a photo from a newspaper, when you zoom in further and further and further, eventually all you're going to see is dots because it breaks it down into this bitmap dot pattern. Then you zoom out and you can't see it. Your eye can't see it, register all that anymore. So this is Salvador Dali, and he's primarily known for his large surrealistic paintings. Lots of like desert scenes and elephants with really long legs and melting clocks and that kind of thing. But he also is known for doing a lot of drawings as well. So if you were to choose one of his drawings, you'd probably want to use ink. You know, just like Rembrandt, his kind of hatch mark making is a lot looser and messier. Very strange and interesting kind of surrealistic drawings going on. So like I said, not a lot of people draw like that anymore, this high level of detail like a Piranesi, but this is an artist who is contemporary, and his name's Sando Burke. And these are a lot more like simplified than a Piranesi, but he's still using line and cross hatching in a way that has this kind of old school look to it. Like here we've got a scene of all these people on what looks to me like a San Francisco street. He's a San Francisco based artist. I lived there for a long time as well, but you know, it's lots of hills, these bay windows type of thing going on, all the power lines everywhere. And you know, you can just see the level of detail. I think, you know, thinking about cross hatching and contour line and directional kind of mark making, you know, sometimes the actual direction of the line becomes really important. So you've got these diagonal lines that almost show the perspective of the city street, but then the bay window pops out. So the direction of line can change to differentiate one surface from another. So you know, keep that in mind as you're, you know, using one of these drawings as a reference. Like, how do they use the direction of line? How thick and thin are they? How many of them are there? It's another artist who has a similar kind of style to some that we saw earlier. It's actually a dude I knew in San Francisco named Martin Machado, and he works half of the year as a merchant marine, and then the other half of the year he's at home painting and making drawings and paintings. So his work has a lot of this kind of like historical references, a lot of references to the life on open seas and shipping containers and different kind of boats and harbors and nautical theme, I guess you would say. But you know, you can see that kind of similar work in the sky, these like horizontal lines, different type of, even in the ocean, like these different, the flowing of the water, and we get the sense of it being water by these like white caps that are left behind. Just really beautiful drawings. Like a lot of them, you'll see these kind of like sinking shipping containers that may be fallen off of the large boats. Some of them are a little bit more humorous, like giant squid and whatever taken down with these shipping containers. It's one of my favorite artists, MC Escher, and he was alive in the late 1800s and was kind of a predecessor to a lot of what we'll see later on in the class, op art, or this has this kind of like optical illusionistic sense to it, where he was able to take some of the rules like of visual understanding and visual imagery, like perspective, but then manipulate them in a way that you're looking at this image and you can't tell what's up from down, what's right from left. It's all kind of folded on top of itself. So he's using the rules, but he's kind of manipulating them. You know, in this example, you know, you can see all the different hatch marks. So if you were to choose this drawing, you could use pen or you could use pencil because it doesn't look like it's so dark, but you would really try to replicate the different type of hatch marks going on in there. Whereas like in this drawing, it looks like it's a lot more stippled, like dots. So, you know, with your project, if you were to choose this drawing and turn it in and it was all really smoothed out charcoal, you would be losing a lot of points because you're not trying to replicate the mark making. And that's the point of this, is to try to see what it takes to do this and see what you can learn from it. Just like insanely detailed. I mean, even with this image, figuring out the mathematics of it, you know, nowadays you just pop a photo in Photoshop and put a little spherical kind of effect on it and I'll do this for you. But, you know, they didn't have computers in Photoshop in the late 1800s, even early 1900s. So he was just doing this all by hand. It was a really interesting take. So obviously there's different kind of mark makings in the different images. Like this is a really interesting take on a self-portrait where him drawing himself holding this, you know, mirrored ball. But like when you look up close, the type of mark making is, you know, maybe kind of hatching, pencil. Like I'd probably use graphite for this, or for this I would definitely be using pen. You know, if it's hard for you to fill in the entire background, use your India ink. I think that our packets came with India ink, so you could use a brush and paint that in. But whatever you're doing that's new, experiment with it a little bit first before you dive into your nice drawing. More Escher. So like with this one, I probably wouldn't use a pen. Looking up close, it's probably charcoal. For a lot of these, you can look up what it's made out of. And so that's an easy way to figure out what materials do I use. But if not, you know, use your best judgment. And if you still are struggling to figure out what might be the best material, you know, let me know. Ask a question. We can talk about that together. Shoot me an email. But he does this really, you know, we were just talking about negative and positive space. And he does this really interesting kind of play between like background and foreground, positive and negative space, where when we're looking at this side of the drawing over here with the white birds are the positive space, where this space in between them is negative. And as you move over, that negative space becomes the positive, and vice versa of the blackbirds. So there's this interesting flip that he does a lot of times, like play between foreground and background and subject versus the background, I guess. So this is an artist named Anouk Griffin, and she does these beautiful large charcoal drawings that just have massive amounts of detail in them. They have this kind of like almost mysterious sense of these female figures emerging from the woods a lot of times. And you don't often see their faces. So conceptually, it could be about, you know, identity, or it could be about you know, a lot of different things that we won't get into too much, but either way, like she creates these insanely detailed charcoal drawings. And, you know, I think she's a good example of, we were talking about a tree and not being able to draw every leaf on a tree. Well, you can't draw every little fern and leaf in the woods, but you can get this weird sense of the texture through mark making, additive, subtractive. Where do you make these little marks? Where do you not? Like here, you get this sense of like this ivy growing almost. And in some places we actually do see leaves, but in most of it, when you look up close, it's just charcoal mark making. So, you know, what I recommend doing a lot of time is, while you're drawing, put it up on the wall and then stand back from it for a little bit and see how it looks from a distance. Because most people, if you actually show your work, aren't going to be looking at it only from right up close like you are when you're drawing it. They're going to stand back and see it from afar, and it's going to pull them in, and then they'll get up close and see all your little marks. But her work's just insanely beautiful. These are large, so keep that in mind. Like, it's easier to do these crazy detailed type of things when they're that big. If you look here, you can see the roll. I mean, that piece of paper is probably at least 6 feet wide, and it's on a huge roll laid up in her studio. So when you see it up close, you can see just it's big, loose marks. But then when you take a picture of it and shrink it down real small, you know, who knows, maybe this was a 6-foot drawing, and I'm just seeing it on my screen that's maybe 8 or 9 inches tall. So keep that in mind while you're drawing. But her work is just gorgeous. This is another artist who works in charcoal named Mickey Pellerano, and he has almost this like Renaissance photorealistic quality. It reminds me of like a Michelangelo Sistine Chapel. It's got this kind of like almost like biblical look to it. But when you look up close, it's all these different, the subject matter is kind of darker. It's like weird fish, puffer fish, and like Venus flytraps. And so there are these figures, but there's also these weird bugs. There's a narrative, like there's a story happening, whether we know what that is or not, we can make our own assessments. But, you know, it has this one has this kind of like vertical orientation, almost kind of like biblical kind of story, or maybe it's more mythical. It's hard to know, but either way, they have this kind of almost dream versus nightmarish quality to them, and they're all done in charcoal. Really beautiful work. This is an artist named Paul Noble, and I just love his drawings. They're very detailed and very complex. A lot of them have different kind of surface quality here. So like with this one, there's a lot of tiny little mark making. I would probably use a pen for this kind of one. You could probably even lay some charcoal over a pen. You probably can't lay pen over charcoal, but you could do your pen work first and do really light values of pencil or charcoal over it to get some of the value in there if you wanted. Its work is almost has this like MC Escher kind of quality to it. I just love this one because it almost looks like it was made on a computer or made with an airbrush, but I still think it's charcoal. It's just so carefully, delicately done that it looks fake almost. It looks like a computer rendering. A lot of that's just like how smooth everything is. Where not the most high-res image, but you know, this looks like dot and stipple kind of work for the most part. Really beautiful. That's one of my favorite contemporary artists working today. His name's Eric Jonker. He does these beautiful drawings. A lot of times, a lot of them are in color, but I did find some just like black and white charcoal drawings. Sometimes they're graphite, sometimes they're charcoal, sometimes they're ink. You can look at his work online and get a sense of what's what, depending on the image. Once again, if you did choose him, you'd want to choose some one that's actually a drawing in black and white. But his work, he was once before he was a fine artist, he did satirical comics. So his work has these, a lot of it I didn't choose to show here because it can get kind of vulgar, but it's all really funny and humorous. So I had to be careful what I showed or didn't. If you look him up, you'll see some kind of vulgar and, you know, depending on your worldview, offensive or not offensive kind of imagery. But either way, they're always funny, you know, like he takes these things that are serious and then flips it and kind of makes a satire or commentary on it in that sense. So we've got, you know, the classic still life floral motif going on here, but then he's just got this kind of wonky, sad face over it. So they're really smart and they're conceptual in this way while also being kind of silly, like tongue in cheek and funny. It's like Cat with a man's glasses on, or like Einstein, arguably the smartest human in modern history, with a sock puppet of himself and he's feeding it a cookie. So, you know, he's breaking down this, he's taking these different references and kind of making a joke out of it in a sense. But, you know, his work presents itself in this very like high conceptual format where there's like, I just wanted to show you this example. Obviously, you wouldn't choose this for your project, but he's got, you know, sculptural work. If you look, he creates this kind of pattern around the gallery, but when you look up close, they're all hand sanitizers that are nailed to the wall. This is actually his wife, Alison Sholnick, who's a super famous painter as well. Or like these books, it'll look like an American flag, and then you get up close, and each book has they're all titled, they're specific books. So it has a deeper meaning and story in all of them. We saw Raymond Pettibone. He's primarily using India ink and a brush. So just quick, loose gestural stuff. If you were to choose him, you'd be probably doing similar work. I've seen people do his drawings in charcoal, and you can do that. Charcoal will work because it goes so black, but you'd have to keep it really clean and graphic. I'm going to follow up. Basically, that's our slideshow. So what we're going to do now is just look at this project outline here really quickly, and I'm going to go over it briefly It's here, so you'll be able to see it. That video that we're recording right now will be posted right here under the please watch this slide lecture before reading through this project outline, because it kind of will help. So this video will be posted here, but it basically tells you it's called the Master Study Project, and it'll be due on Thursday, 5/28 before midnight. So that'll be posted in here as well, but you're going to be turning in the following. You're going to choose one image, you're going to choose a master, and you're going to choose one image to draw. What I would highly recommend doing is searching a high-res image. If you don't know how to do that, I'm going to show you that real quick. So let's say you've got Google image search. Let's just go to Google. Let's say you choose Leonardo da Vinci. You can be as specific and just say drawings. So here, if I click in images, or I can just search by image. So I click images up here. Boom. You probably all know how to do this. But all these are images of Leonardo da Vinci's drawings. But I want a high-res image, because what I want you to do is, if you have the ability to, I want you to print this out so you can actually see it and hold it and not look at it on a screen. So what you can do is, if you go to Tools right here, and then you go Size, just click Large. You're going to want to do this even if you're not printing this out, because if it's not a high-res image, when you zoom into it, it's just going to look like pixels, and you're not going to be able to see the mark making. So it kind of defeats the whole purpose. So now I know that I've got a high-res image of these angels. So when I drag this to my desktop and print it, I'll be able to zoom in and see all the little marks. So you want one chosen image. You're going to turn, the three things you're going to turn in are that image, one drawing that recreates with similar mark making in the appropriate materials. We'll talk more about that below, and one page written bio of your chosen master. It can be just a half page to a full page typed written bio. So we're going to talk about what all that is. You'll be graded on the following. You can read through that. Also have the rubric attached to the bottom here. But the image you chose, like I said, you're going to want to choose a high-res image. It has to be a drawing. It cannot be a painting or a sculpture. Black and white only. Just showed you how to Google image search. If you're struggling with this at all, email me. Print it out, and you're going to be turning in a digital copy with your project, but you'll have the printout, which will help you to draw. So your drawing, like I said, the point of copying or recreating the master artist's work is to study their techniques, not to just copy. You're going to see how they make marks, how they deal with composition, value, subject matter. You'll need to try to use the same material, or if you can't use the same material, make a decision on what materials you have are going to best represent their drawing. Ideally, it should be around a half sheet of nice paper. You can go bigger, but you can also go smaller. If you choose a Piranesi, you can draw it small, like 6x6 section of his drawing, because I'd rather see a finished drawing than one that you try to you bit off way more than you could chew. So that said, if you choose a really simple image, like a Raymond Pettibone that's really graphic and simple, I'd like to see that big, maybe even bigger than a half sheet, because you're going to put at least 8 hours of drawing time into this. So if you give me a drawing, it's like super simple and it looks pretty small on a quarter sheet of paper, you're not gonna get as many points as if you put in the appropriate amount of time. So, so your three options for your drawing are to copy the drawing exactly as you see it. And this is the easiest approach to the drawing, to this project. Number two is to copy the work as you see it, but to add or change small things. So, you know, maybe there's a vase here, and instead of a vase, you change that to a book, but you're still trying to recreate that in the same mark making as that vase was. This is a slightly more difficult object or option. The third and most difficult option, which I only recommend if you're trying to put in extra time and you're okay risking getting a good grade, not as good a grade, is to just make your completely own drawing using a reference drawing from your chosen master as an example of what kind of marks and materials they use. So you've got a completely different image, but it's all done in the same type of mark making, compositional choices, contrast, value as the chosen artist and image. So much more difficult version of this project, but if you didn't want to copy something and you wanted to do your own image in that style, you can, but you're going to still have to turn in the reference image. And if they don't look, like if the mark making is totally different, you're going to have a much worse grade than if you just try to copy it and weren't as successful in that. So, you know, it would be, do that, choose it if you want, but just know you're choosing to probably put in quite a bit more than 8 hours. So the written component you're going to turn in is a short bio, and you're going to cover this info here: who they are or were when they were alive, where they lived, the materials that they were known for, and what their work is about, and why it appeals to you. So, you know, a lot of contemporary artists, you can look at different people. If you just Google them, they have websites. Some of them will put artist statements. This is what my work's about. Or you can look at other people that have written up, you know, info about them. So, you know, do some research. What I don't want to see is like a copy and paste Wikipedia. So don't just look at Wikipedia, this person, and then rewrite it. You'll absolutely lose points for that kind of thing. I want this in your own words. Like, it doesn't need to be a paper. You don't need to cite references and everything, but they were born here, they lived then. You know, write it in your own words. Don't just copy and paste it Wikipedia, because I've got that before a lot on this project, and it's pretty obvious when like 4 people do the same artist and they all choose and I get the bios and they're all like word for word exactly the same. It's like you look at Wikipedia and just copy and paste. So you absolutely lose points for that. Plus, I want your own info here. Like, what's the work about? If you can't figure out what it's about, what do you think it's about, and why does it appeal to you? Why were you interested in this artist? So here's the list of the artists from the slideshow that we saw. You can choose an artist that's not on this list, but they have to be a legit artist, and you have to clear them with me first. So it can't just be like, oh, my friend does these drawings. Does your friend have recognition? Can I find them easily online? Have they been reviewed? Like, I want someone that's established, like a true master. Like, sure, maybe your friend or family member is really good at drawing, but I want you to be able to research this person. I want to be able to look them up and find info. And if that's not there, then they're not like quite yet. Maybe they make as good a quality work, but like professionally, they're not as recognized. So, you know, you can choose someone, like maybe it's a comic artist, maybe it's someone else you're super into. Just clear it with me first. I gave a bunch of references down here and places to different art blogs where you can go on and just like search drawing and see what comes up. You might find some other artists that you like. Your master study rubric attachment is down there below. So that's the project. Basically, I'm going to upload a video on Thursday, but it's just going to be some info on presentation, it's a quick little demo on like how to trim down your paper with your razor blade and a straight edge without cutting yourself, and a video on how to use that spray fixative so that your charcoal drawings don't get all smudged around, even graphite drawings. So expect the video on Thursday, but it's just going to be a little demo, and your work for Thursday, we're actually pretty right on point with our syllabus. It's just going to be use it as a studio day to work on this project. So, you know, this is our first like real big project, and I'm going to be grading it accordingly. So, you know, if you don't put in the time, don't be shocked if you get a C on it. I'll be able to tell. So we've got a week and a half. I'd recommend starting on this sooner than later, at least in the next day or two. Figure out who you want to choose and figure out which image you're going to choose, print it out, start figuring that out. Any questions at all, just email me. I'm doing my best to kind of get things graded, at least have everything from that week up and graded every week. So everything up into this point is graded and ready to go, other than what's been turned in this week. So once again, any questions, just ask. If you've got stuff that you haven't turned in, you can still do that for late credit, partial credit, got extra credit opportunities. Thank you. Appreciate all your hard work, and looking forward to seeing your projects.